and I'm the president of the society. I'm very happy to have you all here tonight. Tonight we're welcoming Susan and Elizabeth, who work at the Hoover Minthorn House, or volunteer at the Hoover Minthorn House. We're here to speak to us about Hoover's Oregon Boyhood and about the Hoover display that we've got in the hallway here. So, without further ado, let me welcome you to the stage.
Works. Susan and I are volunteers at the Hoover Minthorn House Museum. We put together this exhibit with a theme because we want to perhaps catch some residents in Newberg who haven't yet heard of the museum, maybe don't know Herbert Hoover. I figure half the population is younger than I am, maybe 2/3, and they don't know about him. And then learn more about the Minthorn family and the Quaker migration that was the establishment of Newberg. One of our sources was this wonderful book by Kenneth White. This covers Hoover from very early days in West Branch and right through his political career to his retirement. And it's a wonderful story. I really recommend it. It's a good read. The author is a reporter. He tells a good story. He's not a heavy-duty type. Anyway, it's a speed read. It's good. And so we have used a good many quotes from this book for our texts in the exhibit. And we can talk about different segments of the exhibit. Susan will talk about the origins of it, and I'll talk about the half I did. We used fishing as our theme because when Herbert Hoover was here, he was a little boy, an orphan, lonely. He was very well cared for and welcomed into the Minthorn family, but he was on his own. I mean, he was 8 years old, 9 years old. But he loved slipping away from the chores and going off into the woods and into the fields and into the streams, fishing. And ultimately his brother came to Newberg, and both of them enjoyed fishing. So since that was a very happy element of his life in Newberg, we've used that as our theme because he was a passionate fisherman for the whole rest of his life. Do you want to talk about the exhibit at Willamette Heritage Center and how we've morphed it to suit this?
You can hold that microphone right up to your mouth.
Yeah, like you're licking an ice cream.
Let's see, Elizabeth and I and Sarah all worked on this exhibit for the Willamette Heritage Center. I don't know if any of you were able to go down and see that. It's an invitational display that they have, I guess, about 5 or 6 years, maybe more than that. And the theme this year was Arrivals, which talked about the people who came to receive the specific display along with one of the elements of our display. And it was how people came to the Willamette Valley. And so we did that exhibit, and
We did the Quaker migration.
yes.
They came from all over.
But anyway, I'm not sure I can let me say. Anyway, the Willamette Heritage Center exhibit counts for our contribution to it was for the Hoover Minthorn House, and it was the families of Jesse Edwards and Dr. Minthorn and Herbert Hoover. Those were the panels that Sarah created, and then we put together a map that shows where they came from, and they came from primarily, a bunch of them came from the Midwest, from Quaker settlements in the Midwest, and made their way out here gradually to Newberg, another Quaker setup. And so that was sort of the nugget of our display in Salem at the Willamette Heritage Center. then when we morphed it, as we say, into the Herbert Hoover's boyhood years in Oregon, Elizabeth added the maps of Newberg and Salem with particular area points on those maps that are described in Kenneth White's book. And then we've also added some additional information and one of the, there's a comic book that was put together by a man named Bob Satterfield, and he, I think that's the right name, Robert Satterfield, in 1928 for Hoover's the campaign for president, and that shows in comic book form. Satterfield was a very popular political cartoonist that was in the Midwest, and he was syndicated, and his cartoons were sent to small towns all over the country, and he was a particularly popular person, and so the Republican Party asked Satterfield to put together this comic book which talks about Hoover's life in comic book form, and Sarah made arrangements for the Hoover Presidential Library in West Branch to send out reproductions of this comic book, and that's what Elizabeth mounted on the wall down here. And it's interesting, the Hoover Presidential Library sends out this comic book in reproductions as a teaching tool for, I think it's primarily schools in Iowa, but it's available for anyone, and then they send it out with different ways of interpreting it for the students. And it's, you'll see it's very interesting, and it's also interesting just to know the value of political cartoons at that time. And as Elizabeth, who's an artist, was saying that in the 20s, actually even earlier, that it was so much easier to reproduce in a newspaper a line drawing as opposed to a photograph. So when you look at old, as you probably all have, old newspapers, you do see an awful lot of line drawings that illustrate the different stories. One of the things that was very helpful, one of the sources that we had in putting together this exhibit, the one in Salem and this one as well, was talking to historical societies all across the country in putting together the route that Hoover took from West Branch by train, and piecing together the stages that the train, that was just the whole story of opening the West, which was in, as we all know, going through the Promontory Point and all through to California, but then the branch that came up into Oregon didn't open until 1884, and Hoover came out in 1885. But it was interesting to talk to railroad historical societies in Iowa to find out which line it was actually the one that Hoover would have been on. And so we tried to make that pretty clear, and I think we did on the map that we put together as part of the Salem exhibit. So that's what we have down the hall for you to see. And if you have questions, I think we'll answer them to the best of our ability.
The theme of the title of our exhibit is Hoover's Boyhood in Oregon, the Years of Growth. And he was, of course, quite young when he was in Newberg and only was here for 3 years. So Salem really was the greater imprint on his life. He was a very bright kid and found his niche right away. You can read about his immediate success in Salem and opted to work rather than go to high school. But then realized the wisdom of maybe going to college, so he quickly went to night school, got some extra help from interested parties, and was able to go to Stanford as part of the first class that Stanford opened that year. We had a little introductory statement, which I wish I had in front of me, as it kind of crystallizes our interest and admiration for him. he led a very interesting life, many facets of his life to pursue. He was very self-reliant. He learned early on that he had to take care of himself. And this stayed with him. He was very energetic. You read in the book that he can't sit still. So he's twiddling something in his pocket or he's shuffling papers. He can't sit still. He's on the go all the time, except when he's fishing and he can sit still. He learns humility at the end of the fishing pole because there's a wiser element on the other end of the string and things. And then, of course, he had a very interesting business life before he came back to Washington and entered the government work and ultimately ran for president. In 1928, they say that it was a landslide election. He built up such a reputation after helping pretty much feed Belgium when they getting ships through the German lines. Everybody admired him, but he carried on that same sort of energy and interest particularly in children, always in children, till in his retirement, not to be idle, he communicated with children. They were writing letters and he would answer every one of them. And always had time to produce books. We have quite a wonderful supply of books by him and about him at the museum. And one of the reasons that we have put up this exhibit is that, as I said earlier, we want to sort of cast the net and find some people in Newberg who perhaps haven't been to the museum, and we want to start a Friends of the Hoover Minthorn group, and it would be an email organization. No fee to join, just give us your email and we would send little announcements of various activities. And Britta, would you talk about that? Britta, we're very excited to tell you, is now the assistant director at the museum.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Britta. I've met most of you before. So our Friends group is something that we'll be starting hopefully this summer, within the next month. And essentially it would be, as Elizabeth mentioned, just an email group. And we'd send you email updates and newsletter probably monthly with museum happenings or little historical facts about Hoover. It'd be a great way to do little mini exhibits and research projects for myself and some of the other interns at the museum. So it'd be great to have your support, and it would be a wonderful way for us to increase just our basic interest and possibly even volunteer opportunities if people would be interested, and really just keep people up to date with what's happening in the Newberg community. So we would love to have you join, and we have sign-up sheets here that will be available, so don't leave without doing that if you're interested. Thanks, you guys.
Would you like to walk through the exhibit and then we can kind of point out special things of interest and answer any questions, Sarah?
I just wanted to say one thing that maybe not everyone here is aware of, and that is that the Hoover Minthorn House Museum is owned and operated by the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Oregon. And Elizabeth and Susan are members of that society. Many of the members of the society live in Portland. They don't live down in Newberg, although there are a couple of people in Newberg area. But I think that it's nice to know what organization it is that is operating the museum, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about what the colonial kings do nationally.
It's a society that has history as its basic purpose, and it's a lineal organization. Everybody who belongs can trace an ancestor back to colonial times. About the museum itself, in the early 50s, the house came up for sale, and Bert Brown Barker, who was a childhood friend from Salem, Hoovers, got together a group of Hoover friends and started a foundation, purchased the house. It had had some alterations over the years, and so they turned it back to what it would have looked like in 1888. And he and his daughter scoured the countryside for items from old houses and barns that would have been appropriate to an 1888 house, and they furnished it. They were also very instrumental in establishing the Aurora colony houses, turning them into museums. Then in 1981, something like that. No.
That's right.
50 to 55 was when it was dedicated in 81.
Okay, 1955, Hoover himself came for the dedication. And upstairs on the second floor is his actual bedroom furniture, which through a series of serendipitous events came back to the house. So that was one element that he recognized. But then in 1981, the house was turned over to the colonial dames, and we have managed it ever since.
The colonial dames actually were begun as an historic preservation organization. It was the initial house was in New York City, the Van Cortlandt Manor, I think, or something like that. I can't remember. I've never been there, but that was the original house. And and historic preservation has always been one of the fundamental interests of the colonial dames. They have patriotic services and historic. It is, as Elizabeth said, history is their passion, and it's their, I can't remember what their logo is right now, but history is the future, I think is the name, is what they say, that's their brand right now. But it did start out, and they have, I think it's something like 41 houses that they own outright, and then another probably 30 that they participate in across the country. And some big houses, little houses, and then they, in addition, are involved with Sulgrave Manor, which is George Washington's his ancestral home in England, and so they take care of that as well, or parts of it. I mean, they contribute. All of these houses are very capital intensive, so in many cases they have, in fact, ended up joining with other organizations in order to maintain them at the standard that they hope to maintain, including state of Virginia owns one of their particular houses there, and there are all kinds of different ways that they do approach historic preservation, but that is one of their fundamental interests, and we're lucky to have it here.
Oregon has the only presidential property.
What's the difference between the DAR and the colonial dames in terms of
Good
what you
questions.
do?
I think there are more similarities than I think
And
any
then quite a few
differences.
more DAR members. The Dames is a smaller organization, which is one thing. I can't remember, I recently did look at the numbers, but it's significantly different numbers. And, but they're all both are lineal organizations, or whatever you call them.
And own properties around that they look at.
You work together.
Upon occasion, doings.
But the colonial dames owns more historic properties than we are. I learned that last year.
Well, I know I heard about the DAR from a little kid, but I only learned about the colonial dames not that long ago.
Now
I know.
I think they're old. I think the Dames are older as an organization, but about the same. It's very interesting reading about the DAR, though. They have this enormous complex in Washington, D.C. I mean, but they're different kinds of organizations, but both historic preservation is fundamental. Sarah, you, I think, probably are better about some of the
I
details.
just had one unsubstantiated fact that I learned that I thought was, just in principle, even if it's not factually true, and that was, I was told that the outside of the National Park Service, that the colonial dames
It's pretty impressive.
It's very impressive, and it's a wonderful heritage. And they house collectively the properties that the Danes operate nationally are kind of called the Great American Treasures. So it's something to look for when you travel too, because sometimes they're interesting sites with kind of a different angle on the history that you might not think of looking for. And I think the premier example may be Dunstan Hall, which is probably the most significant of the houses that's operated. And that house was owned by George Mason, who was the author of you can correct me anywhere, Virginia Bill of Rights, which was the base for our American Bill of Rights. Anyway, that was
Very impressive.
yeah, we're lucky to have that house owned by colonial Danes in this.
And in that particular situation, the state of Virginia owns the house and the property, and then the Danes manage it, and they own the collection inside. Works well. Would you like to wander through the exhibit, or?
All right, so the second part of our presentation is actually taking a moment to look through the exhibit. So let's head over there and ask, we've got 4 Hoover Minthorn House people here.